Howdy, this is Mackenzie Franklin from SideGame LLC here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And today we're talking about 5 more board games that left the SideGame library. These are all games that left for one reason or another, but have also been replaced by certain games. So I'll make sure to give you some recommendations for things that you can take a look at instead. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please make sure that you do. It is the best way to help us grow. And for those of you already subscribed, thank you so much for the continuous support. Let's talk about 5 more board games that left the SideGame library. The first game here is Corrosion. This is an engine building game, quite literally, where you're going to be creating a temporary engine in front of you. You'll have this wheel that you spin, and every time you spin it, generally it's going to trigger these different machines. You have these turn machines that last a couple of times, then they give you a resource of some sort. If you ever make your X back to these cards that you've spent, you'll add those back to your hand, and then sometimes you'll have these one-shot machines that give you special abilities too. And you're going to be doing this in order to create these large chrome machines using these fancy chrome gears in order to give you awesome special abilities. Now the main core system of this game has you playing these action cards out. You're going to be playing them in order to gather one of these machines usually, or resources, and you get them from this market that's in the center of the table. And then you'll eventually turn your wheel and get those cards back. But it also has a following mechanism where you can discard cards in order to follow other players' actions as long as you are discarding cards that are a higher value. So a lot of the times you're taking actions on other people's turns, and then on your turn you're going to be playing one key card or turning your wheel in order to get those cards back. And this is one of the things that makes Corrosion need to leave the library. It has a very weak follow mechanism because a lot of the times you are taking subpar action on other players' turns, and on your turn you're usually just turning your wheel, and honestly it does not feel very good when you're doing that. Most of your turns are not super satisfying, and you have a lot of small little turns, but there's no big sense of progression, as these small tiny actions that you're doing are pretty much the same actions you're going to be doing throughout the entire course of the game. It's a very long experience, it's a little repetitive, and the first turn really feels like the last turn. There are a lot of these special abilities that you can get, but everything is temporary. So a lot of the abilities you may get are very minor, maybe generate a gear, and some are very big abilities, but eventually you'll need to cover those abilities with other machines, or they may just wear out in order to just progress your game state and go for the victory points in the game. It also is a very long game. There's not a lot of downtime, which is nice, but those small actions that you are taking just do not feel very empowering, and honestly a little boring after a long time. Now, if I do recommend a game over this, I'm actually going to choose Boonlake. This has a very similar feel where you're going to be engine building. You have a lead mechanism and a follow mechanism, but the big thing here is when you're taking an action on your turn, it feels amazing. You have this large action board here that's going to not only give you some super powerful action, but also the ability to move along another track and get some additional bonuses. You'll be able to play an assortment of cards from your hand, constantly drawing cards, constantly getting new unique abilities that you're able to play in front of you, and the ability to customize your abilities that you'll have for the rest of the game. This is definitely more of an engine building game in a traditional sense, where you're going to continuously get better and better, and you're going to see that progression throughout. But I think that follow mechanism really is important in this one, as you're constantly engaged in all players' turns, and those actions feel satisfying. You're always feeling like you're doing something that's progressing yourself, and you definitely see a huge difference at the end of the game than you do at the beginning. So I really like this one. It's a Alexander Pfister game that features that follow mechanism that I think is brilliant, and I think it's one that you should check out if you had an idea that maybe you were interested in Corrosion, but are looking for something that is going to give you that satisfying feeling overall. So that's my recommendation over Corrosion, Boonlake. The next game we're talking about here is Gunkimono. This is a tile laying game that's based off of Heartland, where you're going to be trying to place these domino tiles onto this main game board, and when you play them, you're going to try to group areas as best as possible. You have the option to either gain points based on the number of colors that are there. So for example, if you place this tile right here, this orange and yellow, you could gain just 1 point for each because they're not touching any other tile. So maybe a bad example. Let's say that you played this blue and yellow tile here. You could get 1, 2, 3, 4, and then just the 1 for the yellow. You can also alternatively move up on these temple tracks, which will allow you to place these fortresses on the board. And those fortresses are going to score you passive points at the end of every turn. Now the reason that this one left is the gameplay is very repetitive, and not just during the game, but from game to game. You're pretty much going to do the same thing every round. You're laying out these dominoes in order to move up the temple tracks, and then you will place your initial 2 temples, and then you'll start generating those points. And then as soon as you've done that, the rest of the turns are very simple and not really that compelling. You don't have any very big aha moments. You're just doing your actions, you are placing those tiles out, and there's usually a best action as to increase your own area of the spaces that you're placing, and also go for the things that give you the most points right now. It's also very easy to gang up on whoever the leader is, as there is a fixed turn order. There's not really anything you can do. If you jump out ahead, all the other players can very easily play tiles that will not only score them points, but also cut you off from scoring points. So it feels very bad when you are just sitting there and don't really have a lot of agency to prevent stuff like this from happening. So I do find that there are, in addition to not super exciting moments, there's also a lot of feel-bad moments for those people who do generally get piled on in games like this. So very much a pick on the leader sort of game here, with not a lot of agency to repel that. So it is a little bit too simple for my taste with that lack of agency and repetitive gameplay. So it's not one that I'm super compelled to pull out ever, as you have that similar arc of a game with that similar experience every time. There's nothing really there to change it up or spice it up, as opposed to the biggest variance is the order in which you draw your tiles, and that's more on the luck side and not necessarily on the variance side. It's just determining where you are placing them as opposed to how your strategy is going to change, if that makes any sense. I probably said it poorly, but I'm going to move on to this next point. Hopefully you can help me clarify that in the comments. But for my replacement game for this one, I do recommend you try out Foundations of Rome. I'm going to give out 2 recommendations for this one because Foundations of Rome is a bit on the pricey side, but I do think that it takes this idea of placing pieces in a central area and fighting over control of spaces and does it very well. So Foundations of Rome has this same idea of placing out tiles. In this case, they're polyominoes, not just dominoes, and you are going to be placing them through this city. And in order to place them, you have to actually purchase the land where they are. So for example, only the red player can place pieces here. And I love this choice and tension here because the tiles, not the tiles, but the cards that are signifying the different plots of land on the board come out at random intervals. So you aren't really sure when they're actually going to show up, but you know that everything is in the game. And so it's a race between the different players and a great decision point between do they start building immediately on the board or start buying up the land to give them options in the future. And obviously you're going to want to group stuff together, but sometimes it's just out of your range or your price range, and maybe the scoring is coming up and you need to make sure that you get a specific building down. You can score points based on the buildings that are around the table, not just yours, but your opponents. There's a lot of interaction here, great quick turn flow, and the game is extremely different each time you play based on that order of the buildings that come out. There's also a bunch of little modular expansions that work very well for this experience, giving you special abilities, powers, these monuments that will change up the game drastically with giving you these objectives that you can chase for. I do really recommend this one. I think it's a wonderful, light style of game, very similar to Gunkimono's place where it would be in a collection, but I think it does a great job with what it's trying to do with this interaction, but also being a family-friendly game. So I do recommend Foundations of Rome. If you're looking for a game that is a little bit more accessible, though, I do recommend Kingdomino Origins. Now, it uses the domino pieces, but instead of placing in a central area, you're going to be placing in your own area. But that doesn't mean that there's no interaction. The interaction comes from the bidding of the tiles. So what's going to happen is you're going to be bidding on these polyomino tiles, and you're bidding essentially your turn order. So whoever is going to get the best tile is going to pick last in the next round. And the tiles have these numbers on the back, so you can clearly tell which one is better, and they are objectively better. And this one is awesome because it has a lot of these small little modules that you can integrate into your game as you see fit, and it's also can scale in its complexity because of those modules. There's a lot of fun things to be had. I've played 2 of the 3 modules so far, and I think that this is the version you should get just from the baseline. I think it offers some great decision points with the expansions and the way that they interconnect, and I think that this is a great evolution of the system. So my strong recommendation here, I think you're going to be great with both of these games. I actually rate this one higher than Foundations of Rome because I do think that Kingdomino Origins is amazing. But I do think that if you're looking for that competition in a central space, I do think that Foundations of Rome is going to be what you're looking for. So that is Gunkimono leaving the library and being replaced by Foundations of Rome, as well as Kingdomino Origins. Next up, we have Margraves of Valeria. Now, this is part of the Valeria series. This is very much Mr. Vallejos here, his whole idea of taking this concept from something like Concordia and placing it into his own universe here with the Valeria series. So Vallejo has given us a game that has a lot of different mechanisms from a lot of other games. You have a shipping track, you have some combat systems here, and then you have a scoring system that you can sort of see on the right here, where you have these 4 major symbols that you're going to be climbing up on, and each of the symbols is associated to either a type of card, the cities that you can populate on the board, as well as these tiles that you can earn throughout the game. So not only are you trying to collect these symbols, but you're also trying to increase your influence on these different tracks. So that's the main core of the game, is you're trying to collect the symbols and then trying to increase your influence on the symbols that you're collecting. So it's a very simple set collection game in the form of the symbols, but there's a lot of varied actions that you can take with these multi-use cards that you're going to be using to move your Margrave around the board. So on your turn, you'll be playing one of these multi-use cards. You either use it for the effect on the card or you use it for the symbols in the corner, and these symbols have a variety of ways that they're going to affect the game. Usually it's going to do something like generate resources or allow you to move your Margrave, and when you do move to a new spot, you can trigger that Margrave's effect. And the whole idea here is, once again, to dip into a little bit of everything and at the end game get up on those big tracks at the end here. Now, the reason that this one is leaving the library is I do think that the multi-use cards are pretty weak, and that ties into the way of the cards interact with the scoring. So most of the time when you purchase cards, you're going to pretty much ignore the effect on the cards because you are looking at that symbol primarily. And as I mentioned before, you really want to go up on this track, and so that symbol has to match the thing that you're focused on. Otherwise, it's almost a waste of a turn if you get a card with a good ability, but it's not giving you any points in the long run, as you're not going to be picking up your cards very often. That I've found, it's one of those games where the longer you can hold off on retrieving your hand, the better. So I do think that that is a huge issue that this game suffers from, is the cards really aren't that interesting, and the multi-use nature of them, most of them have the same effect on the multi-use cards. You can see some examples here. You've got the Bogatir here, who gives you a strength, a movement, and then you move a knight. And that's the same on, you can see 3 of these cards. The Craftsman gets you a resource, a movement, a knight movement, money, movement, knight movement. And most of the different classes also follow similar trends. So the multi-use, I think, is pretty weak, and that scoring criteria is going to push you to the decision as opposed to the effects of the cards themselves. And I do think that the game itself does some interesting things, but I don't think it does any of them particularly incredibly. One thing that you can see here is the combat here. This one is every time you kill a monster, based on the number of the knights that die, you send them to the graves and trigger some bonuses. Now, this can take quite a bit of time as well, so it does add to the downtime of the game. So you're going to be placing these on this grid, and if you complete a row or column, you get the bonus. And a lot of times what happens is people who get early combats in are going to be at a severe disadvantage for the person that maybe gets the 3rd combat in, because they can fill out the rest and get way more bonuses than the other players, which is a little frustrating, but it's kind of an opportunity cost, right? So you can't really do a big criticism on that. But I do think that it is, while it is interesting, I don't think it's particularly amazing. And that's how I feel about the game as a whole. I think that it has a lot of good ideas, but ultimately, I don't see myself ever wanting to really play this one. The action system is fine, the game is fine, the resource conversion, you're collecting these resources in order to build buildings, those buildings get you the influence points, are fine, but I just am not super interested to return to this one, unfortunately. So not one that I'm going to be coming back to. It already has left our library, and if I do want to recommend a game that has this system of you're going to be buying cards into your hand and then playing them in order to take actions, I recommend Aquatica. Aquatica is an awesome game where you are going to be in an underwater setting. You're going to be playing these action cards onto the board, and these action cards are going to do a variety of things. You're going to use them to either collect these cards that actually will slide into your own personal player board here, which is amazing. It gives you a lot of abilities to trigger combos, and this is where your main points are going to come from. But they also facilitate the different aspects of the game as well. Refreshing markets, adding new cards to your hand, getting this resource generation in the form of mantas, and also some just really interesting abilities that are outside of the scope. I think it does a really good job of using the ability cards to explore the different mechanisms of the game. I really love that the victory points aren't tied to the cards, as a lot of the games like this are, where the cards themselves are just strong, and they they facilitate you doing something else in the game that will eventually lead to points. And I think that's really awesome. You're going to be crafting a card in your hand, and these cards, you're giving up a whole turn of the game to add one to your hand, but they're also worth points the more that you have, because they understand that it's not the main point engine, but it also gives you an effect that you feel really good every time you play. And every time you play a card and you get it back with your matron, you just feel even better. So I think that this game does a really good job at the build a hand of interesting cards throughout the game and then use those cards and then play one card to get them all back. I think that this Aquatica does a really good job and might be one of the best ones for this system of this recursion. But tie that in with the really interesting sliding card mechanism here, and I think that this makes for an amazing experience. I do recommend that you get the Cold Waters expansion if you do get Aquatica. I found the base game was honestly way too... the game ended way too quickly. A lot of the times, the person who got like the first couple of goals, it almost was like a domino effect where if somebody got one goal, they were just going to get all the rest and the game was over before it even started. But the Cold Waters expansion changes the entire scoring system, and I do recommend that dramatically. So if you're going to get this one, do get the Cold Waters expansion. It also adds more cards, which is also super interesting without adding a lot of complexity. I think it adds maybe 2 more symbols to the bonus cards, and they're extremely easy to understand. So that's my recommendation here. Get Aquatica with the Cold Waters expansion over Margraves of Valeria. My next one for you here is Middara Unintentional Malum Act 1. This one's a little sad for me because I really like this game. I think this game is very cool. I really like the story in this game. The narration for it on Foreteller is great. At one point I was listening to this as audiobooks in my car. It is a campaign game though, and that's one of the main reasons it's leaving, unfortunately. So the biggest thing here is if you are interested in a huge dungeon crawler with a broad scope, lots of different variants based on the tiles and the assembling, then this might be a game for you. But for me, I have played a lot of games recently that have pushed this out of the library. And it's unfortunate, but it makes sense, and I hope I can explain why here. So Middara, if you're not familiar with, is a dungeon crawling game. You're going to have characters. You'll have 4 characters that you're going to put in a dungeon. They move around, and you're going to be slaying monsters and trying to get from objective to objective. You have some scenario that you're completing, and then when you complete that scenario, you'll clean it up, move to the next one, set up a new map, and then do it again. You'll level up. You'll get this different currency that you can use to spend on items. There's a whole bunch of items, so a lot of customization in this game, and each character has so many different things that they can hold. They'll have skills, abilities, items, one for every single piece of their body. They'll have hands, arms, a core, different relics they can hold, accessories, as well as consumables, a backpack, and they'll have all of this accessible on their turn every round. You'll have some action points that you can use in order to use your different abilities, attacks. You can even dodge and reflect, and then you'll also be able to use these exhaust abilities that are once per round effects that you can use throughout the game. Now, all this is awesome. I really enjoy this. I think that there's a lot of great things that they do here. But with that being said, the biggest hurdle for me actually is the dice resolution. I've been playing a lot of games recently where the skill checks are super interesting and super fun. And Middara, unfortunately, feels more of work and just counting up as opposed to something that I'm actually enjoying and is easy to do. Not necessarily easy to do. It feels more of, I don't want to say it feels like work, but it's not as exciting to me when I pick up my dice in Middara and I am counting symbols and then counting effects, and then I'm looking at the AI and I'm counting their symbols and counting their effects. It feels like I am needing to track a lot of different things, and I am doing constant math for very little payout. A lot of the times with these characters that you're doing damage with, maybe you're only dealing like 10, or I wouldn't even say 10, maybe 5, 6, or 7 damage at a time, particularly when the game increases in difficulty. And it is not that satisfying to me when you are counting up, realizing you fail, you use ability to reroll, and you still fail. Maybe you pass and you deal a couple of damage, but you're having to almost penny pinch as you're calculating this up. And that's pretty persistent throughout the game. And another thing to compile onto this is a lot of the different effects in the game come in 2 varieties: that standard combat attack, and then there's also a casting effect that is going to use a whole different set of dice that is dependent on the characters and also dependent on the different items that they're holding. So there's a lot of tracking, a lot of small terminology, and a lot of things that you have to remember. And on top of that, I think that the AI management here could be a little bit better. I love that they have these large AI cards here for the characters and the monsters, but I do find that sometimes there is a lot of text on these monster cards, and it can be a bit of a bear to get through. And I find this is what's preventing me from really wanting to go back into this game, unfortunately. So those, in addition, you have the dungeon setup. While it is great that you can customize this dungeon map, I think I have been a little bit spoiled by things like Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, or even to a lesser extent things like Oathsworn, or games where you just play on a single board. Kingdom Death Monster, for example, where you just have one board with a little bit of terrain. You're not having to shuffle through tiles. I think I really like that, as opposed to having to find very specific tiles, and that creates up the map. The campaign play is also a little bit daunting because you do have to commit to playing this game. Otherwise, you probably will forget all of this stuff that you just had to remember, those keywords, those interactions. This one is a very, very much a daunting thing, and I don't think that the references for this game are particularly helpful. You have them scattered throughout the rulebook, and you have a lot of different things going on, and you do need to know every single thing for each scenario, which, as mentioned before, can be very daunting and is very much something that you have to remember. And it's something that doesn't come quite as easily as other games, which is a little unfortunate. And the last thing is, it very much has been replaced by games that have come out recently, and that's what I'm going to talk about next, is my replacement for this game, and that is going to be Oathsworn Into the Deepwood. Now, Oathsworn, I think, does Middara and a lot of these other campaign games, but much better. It has learned so much by integrating the story into the combat almost seamlessly. I love that your decisions are going to affect what you're actually going to be fighting in a drastic way, and I love that it uses the concepts from things like Kingdom Death Monster, where you just put out the main game board, you set up the terrain, and the terrain is pretty much all the same. You have like walls and trees, and then you have one creature that is going to be your main nemesis creature that you're fighting. I love that the AI is digestible and small, but also variant. You're going to have this deck of cards that you can plan for, and it's very easy to read, easy to see what the characters are going to be doing. And then on top of that, I think that the combat as well as the items are not only interesting, but easy to use, and you're constantly going to be changing them. After every fight, one of your items is going to be destroyed, but you can really only have, I think it's 4 items at a time. So maybe up to, I think 4, yeah. Hands, you have your hands, you have your body, and then you have a consumable item. So up to 4 items per round. One of them is always going to get broken. You're going to want to try to keep one of your items, so you get pretty familiar with these items, but the effects of the items are generally pretty small as well. You do have a hand of cards as a character, and you have this great hand management system when it comes to that, but my favorite thing here is actually how the combat is resolved. You know you have a specific number that you're trying to get to, and so you'll do a skill check where you'll roll a certain amount of dice, and you could choose however many you want to roll. Based on the abilities of your character, your items, and your skills in general, you can access these dice that have better values on them, but you still have the same failure rate for each die, and to check if you failed or not, all you're looking for is blanks. And I think that's really helpful because you can at a glance see if you failed. There's no big calculation unless you hit, and if you hit, you count it up and you feel great every time you add. And it's a really great sensation to know you've passed, to count it up, and just see how well you've done. I think I did describe it. You can immediately tell if you passed, and then you immediately get that satisfaction of knowing how well you did, particularly if you're choosing those dice that are of higher values. I think that Oathsworn is... I think it might be one of the best ones for this large campaign experience. I'm trying to think if there's something that I would choose to play. I would probably choose to play Sleeping Gods over Oathsworn right now. I think that game is amazing too. But in this genre of the boss battling, get a character, outfit them with items, I think that Oathsworn might have the edge. I think it even has the edge a little bit over Kingdom Death Monster, if we're being honest. I think that the control that you have over your character and just the challenge and the interesting combat is pretty dang stunning. So big fan of Oathsworn Into the Deepwood. My replacement for Middara. Very sad to see Middara go, but was able to give it to a couple of friends, and I know that they're going to have a great time playing it. So very excited to play more Oathsworn, and I hope that everybody who is playing Middara can definitely find that time to enjoy it and is able to really commit to it for a long time. I'm really tempted to go back and just listen to the story as an audiobook and just go back to the foreteller and just keep on listening to it. So maybe that's something I will do. I'll let you know. Let me know if you've done something like that with a game. I'm kind of curious curious to hear what you think. And that brings us to the last game for today. That is the Isle of Cats Explore and Draw. This is a roll and write version of the Isle of Cats, which is a polyomino laying game, but in this version you are going to have some dry erase markers, your own little dry erase sheet, and then instead of drafting cards for this one, you're going to be putting out a set of 12 cards, as you can see here, and these cards are going to be in a specific pattern, with some being scoring criteria, and then the others being the cats that you can actually put onto your boat. It follows pretty much all of the rules from the original Isle of Cats when it comes to placement and scoring and bonuses and time management, but it is missing a few things, and I think that is the biggest thing. That is the reason I can't really recommend this one. It is missing the tension, and I think that is huge. It's a lesser game. Just as soon as you play this one, if you've played the original Isle of Cats, you will notice it immediately. Everything is guaranteed in this version. There is no tension, there is no stress. It's missing that drafting. There's no currency management in the game. Every time it's your turn in the round and everybody plays simultaneously, you just pick some of the cards and you get to write those into your board. All of the objectives also can be taken by everybody. So you're actually going to have this little sheet on the side here where you track the objectives that you want. And nothing is stopping you. It becomes very much a game with way less interaction, which I find extremely unfortunate because I think that interaction was pretty dang critical in the Isle of Cats. And I'm just going to come out and say it, the recommendation for it is the original Isle of Cats. I think the Isle of Cats is awesome. This game is really, really good. It has this great tactile feel of actually taking those polyomino pieces and placing them into your boats, but the layout is very much the same. But I think that the drafting elevates this game dramatically. You're having to give up specific things for these drafted cards. There's also initiative cards that's put in there where you're going to determine who is actually going to be going first to draft the actual tiles that you're able to pick. And so everything has a sense of non-permanence, and that's terrifying because you have to use your money wisely to purchase cards, and you have to make sure that you are allocating that appropriately. Or heck, maybe you could take a round where you spend very little and save it for the next round and have a huge round that next round. The original Isle of Cats gives you that option to make a lot of interesting plays, and it does not feel rote or by the numbers, and I think that's why Isle of Cats really stands out as a polyomino game in general. There's a lot of these styles of games, and I would recommend this one. I think that Isle of Cats is one of my favorites for sure, because of the drafting, because of the interaction. I love the economy in this game. I love the management of the initiative, the turn order. I love the management of your lesson cards. I love that most of these cards are one-ofs, and so getting a single card feels really good when you get it. And there's also a variety of sets in the form of lesson sets, so each of your experiences is also going to be drastically different because you are playing with a collection of these different lesson cards, which are the endgame scoring conditions. I think that this is definitely the way to go. You also are going to have different boards because the boats are actually going to be different as well, which I find awesome. Whereas in the original Explore and Draw, most players are going to have this same sheet. Maybe that's not true. I might be speaking out of turn here with this. I'll be honest, I have not played this one a lot. It's already gone. Who knows? Maybe there is. If there are more than one boat box, I'd love to hear. Let's see what it says here. 6 boat sheets. Yeah, if you've played this one and maybe I'm totally wrong, please let me know down in the comments. But I have not found any reason to play this one again when you could definitely play just the Isle of Cats instead. Now, if you don't want to play the Isle of Cats, if you're just totally spurred off the idea as a whole, Cartographers is an excellent option as well. It has this same idea of using all of these different colored markers in order to fill up an area. In this case, it's a map, and I do think that one is also fun, but my preferred one here, definitely the Isle of Cats, a strong recommendation for me. So that is Isle of Cats over the Isle of Cats Explore and Draw. And that's it. Those are the games that left the side game library. If you have any questions about any of these games that I talked about here, please let me know down in the comments below. Do you agree with my picks? Do you agree with any of these things that I got rid of? Or do you think I'm crazy for letting some of these games go? I think that I'm pretty justified in what I'm talking about here, but I'm curious to know what you think. And if you have had any games that have left your personal collections, I'd love to hear what you have been getting rid of recently, or maybe if you've got something new that you're excited to play, or maybe you're a little bit worried that it may not hold up. So I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this, and sorry about the clickbaitiness in in the video description here, I didn't realize that I had put Aquatica here, but I'm going to stick with it. I think it's kind of fun. So we'll keep Aquatica up here as a recommendation. So maybe I'll start doing that in the future, is putting some of my recommendations mixed with the games that get culled so people aren't really sure which one's coming up. I think I'm going to do that. Plus, I think this Aquatica here is really cool. I think it looks really good. Then you got to let me know what you think of these new title cards. I think that I like them quite a bit. I think that this is definitely a bit more interesting and intriguing and inviting than the very stoic, coming from a teaching background, very much business first game, the thumbnails that I was using before. So overall, curious to hear what you think about just everything. And thank you so much for watching. Thanks for being here, and thanks for being here to listen to me talk about some games that I've moved on from and games that I've chosen to replace them with. Thank you so much. SideGame Strong.